Washington landed a crystal ball to pull in a major flip on the recruiting trail.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder to all you videos out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, please make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, I want to talk a whole lot about recruiting on the show. Really excited to do so. So really great to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit later on if Washington can consistently be a top 15 team on the recruiting trail year in and year out under Jedd Fisch. I also want to talk about some other things to keep an eye out for, because we are just a few days away from signing day, as all you everydayers are listening to this on Monday. And on Saturday, right before Washington took the field to take on the Oregon Ducks, the Huskies landed a major crystal ball from Sam Spiegelman and Steve Wiltfong over at Rivals and On 3 to land 4-star wide receiver and Baylor commit Jordan Clay. Now, this would be an absolutely massive win for the Huskies on so many different fronts. The number one front being Washington has not had a victory in Texas like this, maybe ever. Top 15 player in the state, depending on what recruiting service you want to look at and whose rankings you like the best. This kid is just absolutely unreal to watch on film. It is so much fun to see what he brings to the table, because he is a perfect complement to the other commits that you have at the position right now, where Blaise LaVista, the 3-star from Illinois, looks like he's another guy who can probably play that X position really well, just like Jordan Clay is 6'3", 200 pounds. And man, he's just such a freaky athlete. It's so much fun to watch, because he's one of those guys who it looks like he can jump right out of the gym, like he's on a basketball court. Like, you know, the old expression of, oh, he can go to the top of the backboard, grab $1, bring back change. You know, that old saying. He is that kind of guy when you look at him in jump ball scenarios. His route running could use a little work when you look at, you know, comparing him to guys like Trez Davis or Corey Barber, the Ole Miss commit, who is reportedly on campus for a visit on Saturday, according to Steve Wiltfong as well. So when you look at him compared to some of those guys, he's not necessarily nearly as polished in that regard, but what he can make up for in route running and some of the finer points of football, he makes up for with elite athleticism. Again, 6'3", 200 pounds. He's got really, really strong hands, and he's one of those guys who can stretch the field for you from the outside. Look at what you've gotten from that position over the last couple of years in terms of guys like Roma Dunze and Denzel Boston and what they bring to the table when just being isolated on the outside of the formation. And the fact that, you know, Michael Penix, Damon Williams, Will Rogers, the guys throwing them the ball over the last couple of years have just said, all right, I know I have a dude on the outside who can go run and go get it, and I trust him to win those 50-50 contested catch scenarios. That is exactly what Jordan Clay brings to the table. And it's so exciting, because if this flip comes to fruition, because of course, anything can happen in the world of recruiting, even a crystal ball is nothing close to a guarantee until it's announced and pen hits paper on Wednesday. There is still just stuff to just be a little bit cautious about in this scenario. But if this does come to fruition, I love this class that Washington is putting together at the wide receiver position. Depends on how you feel about where Dre Pollard is going to play. I don't know if the Huskies are going to wind up taking 3 running backs. It's something to monitor before signing day if he winds up at running back or at wide receiver, because Scotty Graham, the running backs coach, was his primary recruiter. But you look at how he's played down at Ed.W. Clark High School with the speed that he brings, especially on the outside. Like, that's another dude who, if you want to put him in the Z and just have him stretch the field for you vertically, I feel like he could do that very, very well. And then you have a really fun technician, route runner kind of guy who can play the slot in 4-star wide receiver Mason James. So adding a guy like this is exactly what you need in terms of Jedd Fisch's offense, in terms of he's another one of those guys who, if he enrolls in January, can come in and play very, very early in his career, which is also an exciting thought, because this is exactly what showed up in Washington's loss to Oregon. You just need more elite talent at every single position, and there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Jordan Clay is an elite talent. And he's just one of those guys where you look at what Washington's depth chart was like at wide receiver this year, with 3 true freshmen burning their red shirts, and Chris Lawson, Raiden Vinesbright, and Desmond Roebuck. Those guys were just able to establish themselves so early on in their careers, and I feel like Jordan Clay and Mason James as well are probably 2 of those guys who can do that as well, which is, again, just exciting to think about in terms of these guys from outside of Washington's normal recruiting footprint. If you're able to go out and do that on a yearly basis, just get 1 or 2 of those players, that is going to add up over time, because that's just going to create the snowball effect that we've talked about so much on this podcast, of if you are able to generate that kind of momentum and those guys are able to come in, play early, and have success, people are going to take notice of that. And for Jordan, it was really interesting seeing him on campus for the second time in 3 weeks, where he took his official visit for Washington's win over Purdue a couple of weeks ago. So the fact that he was able to come back on an unofficial visit on his own dime, those are things that are really important to note in a situation like that. I saw him on the sideline after the game. I saw a couple of fans cheering for him, saying, "Oh, I hope you flip," different things like that, which was really cool. And it seemed like him and his family really enjoyed the support that they got from Husky fans. But at the same point in time, this is, again, just one of those scenarios where you look at Kevin Cummings, especially Washington's wide receivers coach. He has been looking to pull off a big time flip win like this since his first season at Arizona, when he was able to flip to Tyrone McMillan from Oregon, close to signing day. Like this would be that level of win, and going into Texas and doing that is a whole different kind of beast, because we've seen Washington really try to establish themselves in the South, getting closer to the Southeast, like down in Florida with 4-star wide receiver Jaden Pettit, who the Huskies were making a huge push to try to get up on an official visit, but he wound up at Oklahoma instead, where he wound up committing a couple of days ago after decommitting from Wisconsin. There are a couple other guys you can mention that light, like, again, Corey Barber. We'll see what happens with that. Especially with the whole Lane Kiffin scenario. So that's one to watch, because the Huskies were really in on him early. And then it felt like as his recruiting status kind of caught up with the actual film, he became a much bigger deal in that area of the country. So that's just another one of those flips that's really hard to pull off. But if you are able to land a guy like Jordan Clay, it's not just what he brings to you on the field, it's what he brings to you from just, again, a ripple effect impact standpoint, because he's not the only 4-star Baylor commit to visit Washington over the last couple of weeks. 4-star defensive lineman Jae'lin Battle was also on campus for an official visit during Washington's big win over Purdue. And this is what it's all about. It's about creating that momentum on the recruiting trail, because as these things happen, they will continue to snowball, and you will continue to see more and more and more success, because we've seen these guys that are playing early for Washington have a lot of success. And we saw that in this game against Oregon, where sophomore Adam Muhammad had probably the best game of his career. We saw Dylan Robinson get a nice sack. Zadus Rainey-Saleh continues to just impress on a week in, week out basis. It was a solid day for Ryland Dillard-Allen. Desmond Roebuck, Raiden Vinesbright are guys that continue to get action. John Mills along the offensive line, Pocky Finau and Champ Talia when they've been on the field as well. All of these young guys that are playing, if all of a sudden you keep getting these high-end athletes from areas of the country that you're not usually getting, and they are able to find that same kind of success, that is just nothing but good news for your program. And as we get closer to signing day, the Jordan Clay flip possibility is absolutely something to watch, but he's not alone in terms of guys Washington is making a late push for. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. For me, my mom's Brazilian. I'm a huge Brazil fan. That is wonderful news. I'm absolutely going to be trying to catch one of their games this summer, wherever they might be playing. You pull up the app, and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print. Prices include fees upfront, which I love, so there are no last second surprises at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Doer. I'm so excited to talk to you about these new jeans that I got from Doer because they are seriously the most comfortable jeans I have ever worn in my life, because Doer jeans have 5 times the stretch of traditional denim and they're antibacterial, meaning your jeans stay fresher longer so you can wear more and wash less. And made with Cool Max that regulates your body temperature and wicks moisture, they keep you cool and comfortable as temperatures change. Doer combines classic jeanswear style with the kind of comfort and performance you get from athletic wear. They really are the best of both worlds, designed to look great and stay comfortable all day, no matter what you're doing. Simply put, Doer makes the world's most comfortable pants without having to sacrifice style. Trust me, once you try these, they'll be your go-to. Get a pair for yourself or as an amazing holiday gift. Go now to shopdoer.com/LockedOnSeattle. You'll get 15% off your first order. That's shopdoer.com/LockedOnSeattle for 15% off. One more time, shopdoer.com/LockedOnSeattle. All right, let's go through a little rundown here of all the other things that you need to keep an eye on between now and Friday when the early signing period closes. Feels like most guys are going to want to sign on Wednesday, but it varies for every person, so there's just a lot to keep an eye on here. Let's start with guy I mentioned in the first segment, 4-star defensive lineman Jae'lin Battle. He came up to Washington alongside 4-star wide receiver Jordan Clay. We've talked about a lot already on this show, and for an official visit. And this is a guy who would be a perfect addition to round out Washington's defensive line class, because after you get JD Hill, you have 2 guys in him and 4-star Derek Colman-Brusa who can play a little bit on the edge if you need to. In terms of their size, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of their careers, they're playing 3-tech, 5-tech, a little bit more on the inside in terms of just snap count versus the edge. But as of right now, in terms of what Washington needs, I wouldn't be surprised if we see both of those guys playing edge for the majority of next year. If JD Hill was on his official visit during this last game against Oregon, and I saw him on the sidelines taking in Coach Aaron Van Horn and the outside linebackers during pregame warmups. So just something to keep an eye on there. And Jae'lin Battle is just a really explosive pass rusher from the interior who I love his first step. I love his quickness. I love his power. And if you can just add one more player to this class alongside 4-star defensive tackle Tiayu Mukais, who will probably also play next season, and 3-star Tom Malu, who's going to take a couple of years to develop based on his background and his only, just limited experience playing football. A guy like Jae'lin Battle, who, if you need him to play next season, especially depending on how the transfer portal works out for you up front, that would be a really nice addition. And a lot like with Jordan Clay, like we were just talking about, another guy who can just continue to give you that boost that you're looking for in a region of the country that has not necessarily been particularly friendly to Washington on the recruiting trail. And getting 2 of the top players in Oklahoma in Battle and Mason James would be a tremendous win. Sticking on the defensive side here for just a minute before we flipped over, Ramzak Fruean, the former UCLA commit 3-star linebacker from Bethel High School here in Washington. That's a guy who I've talked about a lot on this show. Sounds like it's down to Washington and BYU for him. And this is a guy that Washington has been in hot pursuit of since the moment he decommitted, where he's one of those guys, you look at the size, the athleticism at 6'4", 215 pounds, wherever he lines up, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, whatever that might be, Washington has very, very high hopes for his future. And in terms of the versatility, a lot like Za'Darius Rainey-Saleh, his former high school teammate. And if you can pair those guys together, you get them up to the size that you're looking for. Ramzak probably needs to add 10, 15, 20 pounds in order to be a consistent contributor at the college level. But with the range and length you get from those 2 guys in the middle of the field, and just, again, also some of the versatility, because both of them have the ability to play outside linebacker and drop into a quarterback spy or rush the passer or drop into coverage, whatever it is you want them to do. That is an absolutely lethal pairing of linebackers that, in terms of just size and length, that we've seen around the Big Ten this season, like what Wisconsin has, like what Ohio State has. If you were able to secure both of those guys, all of a sudden, in terms of the size and frame and athleticism and all of the things that you're looking for in that regard, you are on a tremendous trajectory, because you also have to consider 3-star linebacker Isaiah Tokyo. And all of that size and length is just so necessary in the Big Ten. And I think that Washington is doing a really, really good job of identifying weaknesses in terms of body types and how they can continue to improve on that. Where you just look at the guys that they've recruited at that position over the last couple of years, it's very clear that Washington and, inside linebackers coach Brian Odom and everyone are saying, we need more size and more length and more speed at that position. And it's not to knock some of the smaller guys that also play that position, because we've seen Jacob Manu play a big role. We saw Devin Bryant play a huge role this season. Budal Lukta, before he got hurt, was another guy that was critical to this defense. But combining guys like that who can be a true inside linebacker with players that can give you a little bit more in terms of positional versatility, like Zadris, like Ramzak Fruean, that is what really can take a defense from being good, very good, where we saw Ryan Walters' unit this season, to truly elite. And I'm really excited to see what that might look like, because that's one guy where the star rankings do not matter with what Ramzak Fruean brings to the table. You look at the film, he is absolutely elite. Another guy who I want to talk about as we switch over to the offensive side that I'm really curious about is 3-star tight end Kekua Amua, who's committed to Florida. I'm interested to see, now that John Summerall has been announced as the hire for that job, if he ends up sticking there, if he winds up flipping to Washington after he took an official visit for Washington's matchup with Illinois last month. That's another guy who Washington is just looking to add more size and strength at that position. And Amua looks like he's going to be phenomenal inline blocker at the college level. And he's got the athleticism to develop into a solid pass catcher, but he's one of those dudes who you just want to get a guy like that in the building. We've seen so many injuries and struggles from Washington's tight ends in terms of some of those different things where Quentin Moore's missed so much time. It was unfortunate that Ryan Otten was never really able to stay healthy. If you were able to just build up more depth at that position, we've seen Baron Naone be a guy that Jedd Fisch has talked about, that he's really excited about what he can bring as a blocker, but he's just a different body type than Kekua Amua, who's 6'5", 255, 260 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. So if you can add another guy with that kind of size in terms of wanting to establish the run and wanting to do more things like that in the future, I think that that's something that really needs to be monitored, because that's just another fun addition where it's 2 tight ends in this class, with 3-star Sam Villadal being the other one who just fills that move role really, really well. So it's going to be interesting, because Washington is, I don't want to say they're starting to run out of spots, but rooms are starting to get a little crowded. So seeing how things just shape up moving forward is something to really keep an eye on, because you can say the same thing at wide receiver, where a couple of guys I want to mention. I talked about 4-star wide receiver Corey Barber, the Ole Miss commit, who over the course of this show, while I was recording that first segment, announced his decommitment from Ole Miss. So again, according to Rivals Steve Wiltfong, he was expected to be on campus for yesterday's game in some sort of capacity for a visit. So we'll see what happens with that, because that dude's got offers from all over the country and is certainly a name to watch. And somebody who similarly, just in that same regard in terms of skill set as a high-end route runner who's been really productive at the high school level, is 4-star wide receiver Trez Davis, who was committed to Tulane until earlier in the week when he decided to decommit. And he's since received crystal balls to pick Houston, but I've heard that Washington is not completely out of the race here. So those are 2 guys to monitor depending on what happens over the next couple of days for the Huskies. There is certainly a world where you can still add 2 more wide receivers to this class. And I think that that's something that Kevin Cummings and Jedd Fisch and Matt Doherty and Washington's entire coaching staff is very, very interested in doing, because there's just so much talent out there that seems to be interested in Washington. And like I said earlier, regarding Jordan Clay, if you can continue to add elite talent at every single position, no matter where it comes from, Jedd Fisch has said this a lot. Washington is not and never will be in a position to turn down talent. And if one of those guys, whoever it might be, says, hey, I want to commit to Washington, they're not going to say, well, hold on, we need to figure out numbers. We need to figure out this. We need to figure out that. Washington will take that commitment and then figure out the rest moving forward. 2 other guys I want to talk about in terms of recent coaching carousel news is after Michigan State fired Jonathan Smith a little bit earlier. I got a really good question from one of our insiders. Shout out to the insider Duke Father, where 2 Michigan State guys that Washington has been certainly very interested in. One of them is 4-star offensive tackle Colin Campbell, who the Huskies had set to come on an official visit before he wound up committing to the Spartans over the summer. Now with Jonathan Smith fired, we'll see what might happen with that one. And another one is 3-star defensive lineman Fasciale from O'Day High School here in Seattle. Those two guys, this is just pure speculation, and I think it's worth talking about because they were both players who either did, in Fasciale's case, or were scheduled to, in Colin Campbell's case, take an official visit to Washington. And in terms of positions where you still have the opportunity to add at least one more body, I would say both offensive and defensive line absolutely fall into that category, because if you look at offensive line, Washington was certainly well in the running for a 4-star offensive tackle Marlon Bright, the Penn State commit who flipped to Virginia Tech after taking an unofficial visit there to check out what James Franklin is going to be building. And that one, I can't say it was the most surprising thing in the world, but it always felt like that was a big part of Marlon Bright's recruitment was his relationship with James Franklin. But it does open up another spot on the offensive line. And Colin Campbell is just a guy that this coaching staff was very, very high on for a while, one of the top players down in Arizona, where we know Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff have certainly a lot of strong connections. So that's another name to monitor in that regard. And Fasciale is a guy who just another big, versatile defensive lineman. And if he chooses not to sign with Michigan State, where it looks like Pat Fitzgerald from Northwestern is reportedly the guy for that job, if he decides to back off and just kind of feel things out for a little while, I feel like Washington might say, hey, look, we still have a spot for you. We'd love to see what you can do on this defensive line, especially now that you've seen just kind of what the plan is up front and everything like that. So it's just another name to monitor, because as Washington looks to build on what is currently the 16th ranked recruiting class in the nation, according to 247 Sports Composite, the Huskies absolutely have what it takes to be in the top 15 on a year in, year out basis. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Omaha Steaks. The holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift, and Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family and friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to their door. And this week is the best time to jump in, because their cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. The quality is exactly what you hope for: incredibly tender steaks, rich flavor, and meals that make hosting or weeknight cooking easier. And the variety is underrated. Steaks, burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's one of those gifts that truly fits anyone. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. All right, let's wrap up today's show by talking a little bit of the big picture. Because when you look at what Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff have done since they've arrived at Washington, they've done a really impressive job selling the program, which is something that the Huskies have really needed over the last, let's just call it 5 to 10 years. Because the end of the Chris Petersen era, what he did in his last few years on the recruiting trail was admirable. You go look at that 2023 national championship team, and it was built on the backs of those 2019 and 2020 classes before he decided to step down. And Jedd Fisch has gotten Washington back into that same caliber, which is top 15, top 20. And the real question is, as you continue to move forward, now in the Big Ten, can you consistently stay inside that top 15 mark? Because grabbing elite talent every single season is critical. You look at where Washington right now is in terms of like the blue chip ratio. The Huskies have 11 blue chip prospects out of the 21 that are committed. That's over 50%. That's exactly where you want to be. That's great. Now, as you move forward, the question is, can you do that consistently? And I look at this coaching staff, I look at so many things, and I say yes. So let's start with this coaching staff, because you need a unit of people, not just on the field, but on the off-field side of things in the player personnel department that can sell it. And we've seen both of those teams work very, very well this season, getting some of these guys on campus. When you look at, the offers that are handed out, guys like Marcus Griffin, Jake Crawford, Jaleel Wadood, whoever else it is that you want to mention, Washington has done a great job on that side of building these relationships and a really great job of talent evaluation. We've talked about that a lot on this show, where you look at guys like Gavin Day, guys like Rahsjon Duncan, who were 3-star recruits earlier in the cycle, and now by the time signing day comes around, they're both top 100 prospects. Day on 247 Sports, Duncan over on Rivals. JD Hill, another guy who was a 3-star prospect at the beginning of his senior year, now is right outside the top 100. Now Washington got in a little later on that one, on that recruitment that they did on Day or Duncan. But the fact that they still did that, the fact they were able to identify that kind of talent and put together a sales pitch necessary to secure them, is something that you can tip your cap to and say that is a really good job. You look at so many of the recruiters on staff, whether you want to talk about what Scotty Graham has done in his time here, or Kevin Cummings, especially if he's able to pull off the Jordan Clay flip that we talked about a little bit earlier on, and some of the other recruits that he was able to bring in the 2025 class. Michael Switzer has done a tremendous job in his first year recruiting the position. Taylor Mays has been a tremendous addition. When you talk to some of these recruits in the defensive backfield about him and building a relationship with him and just kind of what his overall draw is after playing the position for so long, being such a legendary college player. John Richardson is someone who will always be known as a tremendous recruiter. And I'm only naming a couple of the guys here because it just would take forever to get through everybody. But I look at everything that Washington has been able to do on the recruiting side of things. And I think that this staff not only has the ability to develop relationships at a really high rate, but they've been able to close. And now you need to continue doing that moving forward, where there's certainly still a couple of guys that you missed out on. I look on the defensive line, and there were certainly some different factors there, but just what Washington has been able to do in terms of building relationships and doing all that, I think that alone is something that can keep them in the top 15. But then you look at everything else that Washington has to offer. Something we were talking about a little while ago in terms of what Jordan Clay would be able to do if he got here was early playing time. And early playing time is something that Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff have always sold. And it's certainly, in my opinion, I think it's the right thing to do, where you look at what any program can be, and it's never, okay, you need to play favorites. This guy needs to play, that guy needs to play, whatever. It's the best player needs to be on the field as often as possible. And if that player happens to be a true freshman, so be it. We saw that on the offensive line this year, where this coaching staff certainly has very, very high hopes for Paki Finau. We saw him play very well whenever he was in there. But you look at what John Mills was able to do throughout the season, it was very clear that he was the best choice for that position. And now next season, we're going to see both Paki and John Mills, who both got a significant amount of experience this year. We saw Champ Talialia really come on as the season came to a close over the final month. And I referenced the offensive line because if you are able to pair, or just not just pair, but if you're able to have those young guys and you trust them to play that position from such a young age, that is a really exciting prospect moving forward, because I think that shows just kind of at every single position all over the field, whatever it is you want to say. Because if you can play off, if you're confident enough to play offensive lineman as a true freshman, you're confident enough to play anybody at any position. And I think we're going to see that come to fruition with this 2026 defensive line class, because I firmly believe as of right now that J.D. Hill, Tiayu Mukais, and Derek Colman-Brusa will all play. And I don't want to say every game next season, because that might be a little too bold, but none of those guys are redshirting. It's very obvious. And no matter what Washington does in terms of the transfer portal, no matter who might be able to come back, if, a guy like Antario Thompson applies for an extra year of eligibility after a junior college season a couple of years ago and gets granted that, I think that all of these guys are still going to be in that rotation no matter what. And I think that's a really exciting prospect because of just, again, the high level of talent that the Huskies have, and the fact that they are able to just say, all right, we're going to put those guys on the field and we are going to let it happen. Jedd Fisch said it earlier in the week when I asked him about Champ Talialia. He said, you get better at football by playing football. So if there are plans to get all of those guys involved, I just think that's a really exciting prospect for the future. And then you look at the resources, you look at the NIL budget that Washington has. I don't want to say it's second to none, but it's certainly a lot better than it gets credit for throughout the country. And without getting in some of the specifics of numbers, because they can just be very hazy, it's very clear that Washington has the ability to pony up for players that they really want, both through the high school ranks and the transfer portal. And as we continue to move forward, I think that is going to be so important, because especially if we want to stay on the defensive line here for a couple of minutes before we get out of here, that's the one position where I've talked about guys like David Bailey at Texas Tech on this show before, where you look at some of the most coveted players in the transfer portal. You hear it all the time now. The hardest position to recruit in all of college football is the defensive line, because everybody is looking for these high-end productive players that can come in and do a job, whether it be, again, through the high school ranks or the transfer portal, that are physically ready to come in and compete right away. Because Again, I talked about this on the post-game show, where if you are able to get pressure with 4, collapse the pocket, no matter how good the opposing pass rush, or excuse me, the opposing quarterback and offensive line is, if you are able to find a way to consistently get pressure with 4 players and force quarterbacks off their spot, you are going to find ways to win more often than not in those scenarios. It's true in college football. It's true in the NFL. And that starts especially on the interior. And that's one of those things where I look at the 2027 class, and that's kind of where I wanted to end today, where as we, again, continue to look at this position moving forward, there are so many high-end guys that Washington is in the mix for in the 2027 class along the defensive line. And when it comes to consistently being top 15, this is the one position where I really want to see everything kicked up a notch, because if you're able to go out and secure a guy like 4-star edge rusher Troy Bowens, if you're able to go out and secure 4-star defensive tackle John Iowane, Tavita Nono, another 4-star defensive tackle in your backyard here at O'Day High School, if you are able to get commitments from those kinds of prospects and stack them on top of your 2026 class and continue just building that momentum that we've been talking about this entire show, that is so important. And coupling that with what you're able to do on the field this year, where was it as significant of a step forward as you were hoping for? No, certainly not. But was it more than good enough to show that things are still headed in the right direction? I would absolutely say so. And that's one of those things that you need to continue having on a year in and year out basis, is finding that success and continue raising the bar and continue taking a step forward. And I firmly believe that this coaching staff can do that. And we'll see what happens here in the next couple of days as it relates to signing day. But that's all I got for all you everydayers out there today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you like everything we have to offer here on Locked On Huskies, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you on Tuesday.